Saludos a todos mis lectores mexicanos. I've been asked by my publishers to talk to you today to see if I might have any ideas that could help you deal with the current crisis that we're all going through. I believe that most of us are aware of the physical dangers that we're all facing with this pandemic and the steps that we need to take to stop the spread of it. But what we're much less aware of are the long-term psychological dangers that we're all facing. And that's what I want to address here today. Now, the dominant emotion that we're all feeling is obviously fear. And I think it would be helpful to understand first the origin, the nature, and the purpose of fear itself. Now, fear is the oldest emotion of them all. And this is what happens when an animal feels fear. It senses some kind of danger in the environment, and immediately powerful chemicals are released in the bloodstream that lead to an increased blood pressure, a quickened heartbeat, and increased levels of alertness and perception, all of which gives the animal extra energy and prepares it for a fight or flight response. When the danger passes, those chemicals pass through the bloodstream and the animal is able to return to its normal functioning. So the purpose of fear is quite simply to help the animal in its struggle to survive. Now, obviously, primates and our earliest ancestors had the fear response. But with the birth of thinking and consciousness, our ancestors added an element to fear and how to respond to it. In the minutes and hours after they felt fear from some danger and those chemicals were still in the bloodstream, they were able to think about what just happened, about this experience, and to imagine other ways of responding. Perhaps they could avoid this particular location where there were predators around. Perhaps they could respond differently than fight or flight, which in the presence of a leopard could prove extremely dangerous. In doing this, they evolved a novel way of using the fear response. And it not only helped them survive, but it also helped them gain power and control over their environment. But what happens to us as thinking, conscious creatures when that fear isn't related to something specific, like a leopard or a lion, but is actually quite vague and amorphous and pervasive? What happens when we don't really know which person around us is actually carrying the coronavirus, or which locations we might catch it? Could it be at the pharmacy or the grocery store? Or we don't really know what will be the long-term consequences for our own jobs and for the economy in general. In this case, the fear response is not actually helping us survive, but is actually harming us. So in the first instance, those chemicals that are released in the blood when we're feeling fear, they just sit in us day after day after day in an attenuated form. And this causes a lot of stress on the body because these are powerful chemicals. And this stress actually lowers our immune system and makes us even more susceptible to catching the disease. But even more dangerous for this thinking, complex social animal that is the human being are the long-term psychological effects and consequences of this. We can't pass days and weeks and months of feeling this generalized anxiety without some consequences. So what happens is that we become unconsciously conditioned to feel fear and helplessness and anxiety in these situations. It becomes a kind of mental habit. And so when this danger passes, as it eventually will, we are suddenly burdened with an overly cautious and overly fearful attitude. Life inevitably entails unexpected problems, unexpected setbacks, and even mini crises. And if we've been conditioned to always respond and think in a fearful manner and always retreat before these particular dangers, we no longer have the ability to attack them creatively and with energy, which is the only human way to solve these problems, which in a complex world actually places us in great danger. But with danger also comes opportunity. As they say, we can turn shit into sugar. And what this means is this is precisely the moment that we can actually begin to work on ourselves, that we can actually develop some critical life skills that will serve us incredibly well once this crisis has passed. We can learn how to actually control certain aspects about our emotions, how we can change certain things in ourselves, so that we can emerge from this moment actually stronger, more resilient, and better prepared to handle the post-coronavirus world. So with that in mind, I've developed several exercises that I believe can help us deal with some of the most powerful negative emotions that we're all experiencing in this moment. Obviously, the emotion that we're experiencing the most right now is fear, but there are also other negative emotions that we might be experiencing as well, such as boredom and depression and frustration and maybe even a bit of anger. Now, we experience these emotions all the time, not necessarily in this particular moment that we're going through. And normally what happens to us is that we don't have the mental space to actually think about these emotions. We simply react on them. We feel anger and we write an email complaining to that person. We feel boredom and we reach for something to help distract us from it. But imagine what that would be like if you actually had the power to control these negative emotions and not simply give in to them. Well, now is precisely the time to work on this and develop that skill now that you have all of this time alone. So let's begin with fear itself. Now, I want you, instead of just feeling this kind of generalized fear or anxiety about the world or about your situation, is I want you to take a step back when you're feeling this emotion and actually analyze it and actually ask yourself, why am I feeling fear in this moment? What exactly am I afraid of? Is there something specific and concrete that I'm afraid of? Or is it something just generally in the air? And then I want you to analyze where it came from. Did it come from a feeling from within, something that you faced in your personal life, some encounter perhaps with someone who you think could possibly infect you? Or is it something that you heard on social media and is viral? And so I want you to be able to take some distance and to think about where that fear came from and to see if you can actually relate it to something specific in the environment. And then I want you to be able to do that with all the other emotions you're feeling. So you're feeling depressed. Instead of giving into that feeling, try and step back and say, why am I feeling depressed in this moment? Is there some specific thing that triggered it? And the same thing with anger. Am I angry because of something that happened several weeks ago? Or is there something that happened just yesterday? Does it come from within? Or is it something that I've been reading about in the newspaper? And so what I want you to be able to do this on a day-by-day basis. If you need to, you can even write it down in a journal, sort of chronicling these various emotions that are happening to you. And I want you to develop the ability, the habit of not just giving in to these emotions, but to actually stepping back and analyzing them and trying to figure out where they come from and why they are occurring to you in the moment. And the reason that you do this is that in the process of analyzing it, oftentimes you will realize this emotion isn't really very real. It's not actually tied to something that's threatening me in the moment, or it's not actually tied to something that is happening to me right now. And so you'll develop the ability to let time pass. You won't feel so angry in the moment because you know tomorrow you won't be feeling the same way. This will help calm you down in the moment and will also help you develop patience as you realize that the emotions that you're feeling now are temporary and that they will disappear probably the next day or a few days later. So instead of giving in to this emotion of fear and having it crippling you, what you're doing in this moment is you're actually doing the opposite. You're developing a critical life skill, the ability to distance yourself and gain a degree of control over your own emotions. The next negative emotion that we're all experiencing is definitely depression. Now, I can't come up with an exercise that can possibly solve such a complex emotion with so many different sources. But there is something that we can all do that can help blunt some of the effects of it. And the first thing is you must understand that the mind and the body are intimately connected, interconnected. So that when you're physically feeling low energy, this affects the mind. And when the mind is feeling kind of bored and depressed, this affects the body. It's a complete interactive feedback loop. But oftentimes when we feel depressed, we separate that and we only think of the mental part and not realizing that there could be a physical somatic source for this emotion. So one thing that you must understand is how the human body is what it's designed for. And our earliest ancestors were constantly moving, constantly on the go. I'm talking about our hunter-gatherer ancestors. They would walk dozens of miles in a day outside. And so our bodies are designed for continual motion and for being outside in the sunlight. That's how we maximize the use of our physical powers. And you'll notice the trend in northern Scandinavian countries, for instance, in the winter, when people can't move as much and when they're not exposed to as much sunlight, they become extremely depressed and even suicidal. So the physical element has an incredible effect on the mental element. And so what I'm advocating in this moment is that you need to move as much as possible and not give in to the inertia that we naturally feel being cooped up in our apartments or in our single rooms. And what this means is, as much as possible, I want you to go outside and take a walk every day for at least a mile. If you're confined to a certain area, then just walk around the block during that time, or use this time to walk your dog or whatever it is. If you cannot leave your apartment, you can always avail yourself of all the incredible online sources for different kinds of exercise routines. But understand that in moving, you will actually help release some of those dangerous chemicals that are trapped in the body, and you will be breathing more deeply. And this physical effect will also help calm down some of these emotions, such as depression, that you're feeling. The next negative emotion that I think we're all dealing with is boredom. And this is very natural and understandable. We don't have our usual distractions that we can rely upon to help us in those moments when we're feeling a bit restless and there's nothing occupying our minds. Now, but boredom is something that strikes us all of the time. And how we manage this emotion in our day-to-day life actually plays a critical role in our success in life and how we're able to think for ourselves and how we're able to find inner resources for distracting ourselves. So I want you to use this time to find a constructive way of dealing with your boredom. Now, what I want you to do is I want you to think of your mind as a kind of a mental landscape. And so we find, or sort of like an ecological system, and there are two kinds of landscapes in the world. There's one with very little life forms, such as a desert, where there's not much variety of plants or vegetation, and not much variety with animals. And then there's a second kind of ecosystem, which would be like a jungle or a forest area, where there's an intense variety of plants and animals. And what happens in these two different ecological systems is they become self-creating dynamics. The kind of dead environment like a desert ends up becoming more and more uniform, whereas the very ecologically rich environment, more and more diverse forms of life tend to form. And your mind is like that. And you want to be able to develop a mind that is full of all kinds of interesting thoughts and ideas that come from many different sources, that kind of creating this rich, self-enriching environment that is your mind. The problem that we have most often, though, with boredom is that we search for external sources to help distract us. We try and go to movies, we play video games, we go out to parties. And what this means is we become addicted to these external sources of distracting ourselves and entertaining ourselves. And what I want you to do is to develop internal resources for being able to entertain yourself, for being able to feel excited from within instead of having to reach from things from without. That is what will help you develop this rich mental landscape that will serve you so well in the world and make you a much more creative individual. The first thing you have to do is you have to develop the ability to be alone. Now, I know you don't often think about this, but the ability to be alone is actually extremely important life skill, because what that means is you can be alone and you can actually think about yourself, think about your life, think about what you're doing, what you're feeling, and not be bored or restless or irritated or constantly grabbing for other things. And this will help you develop the idea of thinking for yourself. The second thing for creating that rich internal environment, the single most important thing you can do is to read books. And what I mean is I want you to read a wide variety of books. I want you to read books of history and biographies. And I want you to read books on ancient history, ancient Greece, ancient Rome, the Renaissance, things more recently. And what you'll be doing, you're going to be like a mental traveler. Locked in your apartment or your room, you are mentally going to be traveling to all these different times in the past, and you're going to be mentally traveling to all of these different cultures, so you won't feel so trapped. And this is what people in prison often do. They discover the prison library, and even though they're confined in their little cell, their mind is able to travel all around the world, and they find this is as incredibly liberating. So I want you to read as big a variety of books as you can, feeding that landscape. And what happens is, when you watch a movie or you do a video game, you're not training your mind to think for itself. You're having other people tell you what to think. But reading books, you're able to develop your own muscle and your own ideas as you interact with that text. The other thing I want you to read are books on philosophy that will help calm you down. Books written by authors who've dealt with very dangerous, life-threatening situations, like the Stoic philosophers, like the great writer Michel de Montaigne, who actually lived through a dangerous plague in the 16th century and wrote about it. Or modern writers like Viktor Frankl, who wrote that great book Man's Search for Meaning, about his survival in a concentration camp. These books will help you develop incredible skills for how to deal and calm yourself down in moments of great danger and panic. The next negative emotion I want to deal with is the incredible anxieties that we're feeling about the future, specifically about our careers, about our jobs, and our ability to have enough money to support ourselves, all of which can lead to feelings of great panic. And the thing to understand about this is that if you're constantly reacting to this emotion and constantly reacting to this fear, you can never get out of it, and you're constantly creating more problems for yourself. The actual solution is to develop the ability to get outside the moment and to think longer term about the direction of your life, about the direction, the goals that you want, and the career that you're trying to make for yourself. Now, I understand for many of you who have lost jobs that this is extremely urgent and critical right now. You don't have the luxury of thinking that far into the future. You need to find some way to pay for food and rent, etc., in the days to come. That's extremely understandable. But it's very important that you don't get trapped in this cycle, because often a lot of jobs are being downsized in this world. You can end up reaching for a career or something 4 months from now that won't exist for a year from now because of technology, and you're back to square one, always looking for something immediate to help you survive. And the only way to get out of that is to think a bit longer term and say, is this a sustainable career? Will this be around long enough for me to be able to support myself? And so I want you to think, is there perhaps a better direction for me? I have to take this immediate job to help me support myself. But where do I want to be in 3 years? Where do I want to be in 5 years? Is there something else, another direction I possibly could take? And if you think about it in that way, perhaps you will realize that there's other skills and other forms of knowledge that you need to develop. And you can actually take this time to learn those skills. But as you elevate your mind above the immediate needs of the moment, you'll be able to calm yourself down as you think of other goals and you're occupying your mind with actual solutions to the problems that you're facing with these anxieties. And even if your career is something that's more stable and you're not afraid of losing it after this crisis, you still want to reassess where you're headed, and still you want to think of, is this exactly the career path that I want to be on? Perhaps before this you were entertaining projects that you wanted to realize, books that you wanted to write, great businesses that you wanted to start, but you never had the time to actually see them through. Well, now is the time to go back to them and to actually try and realize some of those projects and put some flesh on the bones there and actually try and think of how you might be able to realize them when this whole thing passes over. Basically, the ability to get yourself out of the moment and think longer term, think of larger goals, think of what you need in the future is one of the great ways for calming you down and for not being so reactive and fearful and anxious in the moment and getting out of some of these negative cycles that we fall into when we give into these feelings of panic. The next emotion that I want us to deal with is feelings of isolation and all the other things that come with it, great feelings of insecurity and self-doubt about ourselves. And the thing you must understand about isolation is that we are an extremely social animal. And there have been all kinds of very interesting studies and books written about the effects of deep isolation on the human being. We depend on seeing other people's eyes, on touching other people, and having physical interaction with them for actually feeling that we're alive, that we're a human being. And in moments of isolation, we can begin to doubt that and we can begin to crumble from within. So, although we can't physically be around as many people as we need to right now, there are other ways to connect to people. We have to go back a little bit to the past. And a lot of people now are advocating telephoning, the old analog way of just simply telephoning and talking to people. But I think an even better way. I want to go back more to the 18th and 19th century. Back in those days, when people felt extremely isolated from friends that they couldn't communicate to, and there wasn't telephones or internet or high-speed travel where they could go visit people, their main way of connecting was through writing letters. They would write long letters in which they would discuss how they were feeling, what was going on with them. And in writing that letter and in reading it, you would get a look into the inside world of the other people and would help develop very strong, powerful, intimate connections with people you were corresponding with. Now, obviously, with email, we're not going to be sitting there writing 7-page letters. But there's a way where you can start kind of imagining that you are kind of writing a letter to people in which you're not just simply communicating information about your business or the banalities of your life, but you're actually expressing to them some of the things that you're feeling right now, some of the things that you're going through. You could turn it more into a letter where there's more of an intimate confession and an intimate level of communication. And in this way, you can learn other things about the people that are writing back to you. And I want you to expand this circle of people that you're writing to. It can't be too large, otherwise it's going to take up all of your time. But you have some of these virtual friends on Facebook or other forms of social media. And this could be a great way to get connected to people that you normally have very superficial connections to understand what they're going through in different parts of the world. And in doing this, you have an added benefit where you're actually being able to externalize some of your emotions, getting them out on paper or on your screen so you can release some of them. And you're actually helping develop your own writing skills, which is a very important skill to have moving forward. The other thing is, if you're feeling sorry for yourself about you're cooped up and you're confined and how bad your situation is, the other way to get out of it is to develop greater levels of empathy. There's always people who are having something worse than you right now. They're the people who have actually died from this virus. They're the people who are right now sick and fighting for their lives. They're the doctors and nurses out there on the front lines who are risking their lives to help all of us. They're the people delivering our packages who are exposing themselves to danger, or the people working in grocery stores. They probably have it a lot worse than you, unless you're actually one of those people. And so thinking about them and thinking about their plight can help you get outside of yourself and connect more deeply to people, at least on a mental, psychological level. The next negative emotion that I want to deal with is our fear of death itself, of our mortality. Our fear of death is actually the source of all of our other fears and anxieties in life. And one thing you need to understand about our relationship to death is the actual physical component of that. In the past, people who lived in cities or villages, and I'm talking about hundreds of years ago, were constantly seeing death in front of them. They were seeing their parents or their relatives die in their house. They were seeing animals being killed for their food. Death had a physical, visceral presence in their life. And what happens in the modern world is that death has become something so distant and abstract from us. We don't see people in hospitals die. We never see the animals that we're eating being killed. And so death becomes something very distant from ourselves. But the irony of the situation now is that death is actually becoming something much more physical. We feel it all around us, as people did in the past during moments of a plague. And so this is the time for actually not repressing this fear of death, this thought of it, which is what we normally do, but actually turning it around and confronting it in this moment when its presence is so much more real. And you might think, that's kind of gloomy and morbid, Robert. Why do I want to give into that? But it's actually quite the opposite. By thinking about your mortality and about your inevitable death, you're actually able to increase your appreciation of life itself. You're actually able to deepen that connection that you feel to life. Whereas that fear that you're constantly going through is actually hindering your ability to enjoy the life that you're leading. It's making you fearful in so many other ways. So if you think about your mortality in physical terms, you think, well, maybe tomorrow I might contract this illness and I only have 2 weeks to live, or maybe I only have a year to live, or I only have 10 years to live. It'll give you a sense of urgency. You have to take advantage of these moments. You have to realize those projects that you wanted to realize. You don't want to waste time. You want to make the most of each moment. It will also, confronting your mortality, will also make you deeply, deeply appreciative of what you have right now, of the life that you live, that you're actually alive, that you're actually able to see the world around you, hear the birds chirping. It's springtime right now around the world for most of us, and things are actually coming to life around us. But being aware of how things are ephemeral and how nothing really lasts actually will deepen and appreciate your connection to life itself. And this is precisely the moment to overcome this greatest fear that we all have. Finally, a lot of us are feeling feelings of anger and rage and helplessness, and we're not really quite sure where this comes from. Now, I'm not saying I know that it's coming only from this one source, but part of it, I think, comes from the political situation right now, where we're feeling that our political leaders are actually betraying us, that they're actually not solving this problem, that they have let us down, that we're disappointed in them, that they're stupid and incompetent. And in feeling that, we feel a bit of anger and helplessness that we can't control this situation. And so I want to give you a simple gauge for determining whether the leaders in your country are actually helping you or are actually making the situation worse, a way to judge them. A positive leader, the ideal leader in the situation, is thinking of long-term solutions, what we can actually physically do right now in the present and in the months to come for solving this problem and helping the weakest, most vulnerable people in our country. This leader is thinking in the long term and is working with other people to kind of solve the problem. The other type of leader is actually taking advantage of this moment to advance his or her political agenda. He or she is using this moment to pander and play on people's fear and emotions to actually increase their own power and increase their own advantages. They're actually looking for scapegoats and blaming other people and never taking responsibility for what's going on. Those are the kind of leaders that we must feel deeply, deeply angry about. Now, normally, we are constantly dealing with feelings of disappointment in our leadership. And that kind of anger is sort of passive. But this is a moment to turn this anger into something much more active. These leaders literally have blood on their hands. Their actions have literally led to the deaths of many, many of their citizens. And so what we need to do is take this moment to not just feel rage and helpless, but to actually organize and to actually find other people who are feeling this way and to say that we're not going to put up with this. We're not going to feel helpless. We're going to find a way to get rid of these rascals once and for all. And these are Marie Antoinette moments where we can realize that our system of government or our leaders are not serving our interests, and it's time to get rid of them. It's time to change the system. Now, I know some of this might seem a little frivolous and not really so relevant to the immediate urgent problems that we're all facing. But I beg you to think differently about this. These exercises, if you follow closely, will help calm you down and will give you mental space to think more clearly about the present and the future. They will lead to the cultivation of life skills that will help you further on after this crisis has passed deal with any other future problems in life. They will help expand your capacities. And this is now the moment, precisely the moment, to work on and develop them. So please don't waste this precious, precious opportunity. Thank you so much for listening, and please be safe.